The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom falls silent as the first image appears on the massive 98-inch screens. Robert Harrington's mistress in his arms on the Amalfi Coast. What the hell? Robert freezes mid-speech about absolute trust. His presentation remote clattering to the floor. The second slide shows Meredith wearing the diamond tennis bracelet Catherine was denied, purchased with $780 of stolen charity funds meant for wounded veterans. Turn it off, Robert hisses into his microphone, broadcasting his panic to 400 of New York's elite. But Catherine stands unwavering as slide after devastating slide exposes her husband's 2-year embezzlement scheme and secret double life. In this moment, 25 years of being the perfect wife transforms into the perfect revenge. If you enjoyed this dramatic moment of justice served cold, hit the like button and subscribe for more gripping stories of betrayal, revenge, and redemption that will leave you breathless for more. The email arrived at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday, the worst possible moment. I was standing in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by event coordinators, caterers, and volunteers, finalizing every detail of tomorrow's Veterans Honor Gala. My phone chimed with a new notification as I was approving the placement of the ice sculpture centerpiece, a bald eagle with wings outstretched that would stand behind the main podium. Just a moment, I said to the event coordinator, pulling my phone from my blazer pocket. The notification showed Meredith P. Catherine. Here are all the photos from our amazing trip to. The preview cut off there. My brow furrowed slightly. Meredith Palmer was my husband's executive assistant, hired about 2 years ago when his previous assistant retired. Professional, efficient, with perfect posture and a Harvard MBA. She managed Robert's complex schedule with military precision. We weren't friends, exactly. Though we maintained cordial professional interactions whenever our paths crossed, I opened the message, expecting some business-related photos, perhaps from a recent conference Robert had attended. What I saw instead made the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, with its gilded moldings and crystal chandeliers, suddenly feel as though all the oxygen had been sucked out. Photo after photo of the Amalfi Coast crystalline Mediterranean waters, pastel buildings clinging to rugged cliffs, sunset dinners on private terraces. Italy, the vacation I've been begging Robert to take with me for 5 years, the one he always said we couldn't fit into his schedule as CEO of Harrington Global Advisors. But these weren't travel brochure images. The first photo showed Meredith in a flowing white sundress, her arms wrapped around someone taking the selfie. The second revealed that someone was my husband, Robert, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd seen him in years, his arm around her waist possessively. Photo after photo told the story of their romantic Italian escape. Robert feeding Meredith fresh figs on a terrace overlooking the sea, Meredith's tanned legs stretched across Robert's lap on what appeared to be a private yacht, the two of them sharing wine at sunset, her hand resting intimately on his chest, a blurry image of a luxurious hotel room with scattered clothes and tangled sheets. But the most devastating image was the last one, Meredith wearing the diamond tennis bracelet I'd admired in Tiffany's window during our anniversary trip to New York, the one Robert had said was an unnecessary extravagance given our current portfolio allocation. The one I'd hinted about for weeks before finally accepting that we had more important priorities. Apparently, we did have important priorities, just not the ones I thought. Mrs. Harrington is everything, all right. The event coordinator's voice seemed to come from miles away. I looked up, my vision slightly blurred, and forced a smile. 25 years of marriage to one of New York's most respected financial advisors had made me an expert at maintaining composure in public. Yes, of course, the eagle is perfect. Let's move on to the seating arrangements. My hands shook slightly as I slipped my phone back into my pocket. 24 hours from now, this ballroom would be filled with 400 of New York's most influential people, financial executives, political figures, celebrities, and philanthropists, all gathered for the Harrington Foundation's annual Veterans Honor Gala. Robert would deliver the keynote address about integrity in business and service to community, an address I'd helped him refine just last weekend. Sitting in the sunroom of our Connecticut estate as he practiced his delivery, and I offered suggestions for improvement. The irony wasn't lost on me. It tasted like poison. By 6 p.m., I had finished at the plaza and was sitting in the back of my town car as my driver navigated Manhattan traffic toward the Queensboro Bridge. I stared at my phone, scrolling through the photos again, trying to understand how this had happened. Meredith had obviously meant to send these photos to someone else, a friend perhaps, or a family member. Instead, she'd accidentally sent them to me, Catherine Harrington, the wife of the man she was having an affair with. I zoomed in on the timestamp of the first photo, September 15th, 2:47 p.m. That was a Tuesday, just 10 days ago, according to Robert's calendar, which I had access to through our shared family scheduling system. He'd been in Chicago that entire week for a financial leadership conference. The geolocation data on the photos told a different story: Amalfi, Italy, specifically, the Hotel Palazzo Avino, which I recognized from its distinctive infinity pool featured in several shots. I bookmarked that exact hotel on my travel planning app 3 years ago, when I was trying to convince Robert we needed a real European vacation. Maybe when the Boston office is more established, he'd said then. The Boston office that was now generating $30 million in annual revenue. I opened my laptop and accessed our joint credit card accounts, something I rarely did since Robert handled most of our financial management. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed in the password Harrington 1998, the year we'd married. The September statements revealed the truth in stark black and white: Hotel Palazzo Avino, $5,890 for a 4-night stay in their premium suite. Alitalia Airlines $9,600 for 2 first-class tickets to Naples. Amalfi Coast Wine Tours $80. Alfonso's Ristorante $460. A jewelry store in Positano $12,780. $12,780 for jewelry. The exact price range I'd calculated for the Tiffany tennis bracelet I'd been admiring. But here's what made my blood run cold. These weren't charges on Robert's personal credit card or even his business card. They were on our Harrington Foundation account, the charitable organization's credit card that was supposed to fund programs for wounded veterans and their families. Robert hadn't just cheated on me. He'd stolen from charity to do it. With shaking hands, I opened Robert's Instagram profile. There it was, his carefully curated Chicago business trip documentation, photos of the Chicago skyline, the Chicago River, deep dish pizza, posts about productive meetings with Midwestern financial partners and exploring opportunities for regional expansion. But I've been married to Robert for 25 years. I knew his tells, his habits, his patterns. The Chicago photos were all tourist shots, the kind you could find on any travel website. None showed him with actual business associates. None featured the inside of conference rooms or offices. The few selfies were clearly taken with a timer, not by colleagues. I cross-referenced the timestamps. While he was posting photos of Chicago's financial district at 2 p.m. Central Time on September 15th, Meredith was photographing him feeding her fresh figs at an Amalfi vineyard at the exact same moment. Robert had created an elaborate social media alibi while living a completely different reality. The memories came flooding back, now tainted by new understanding. Robert's nightly calls from his Chicago trip suddenly made perfect sense. The time difference between New York and Italy explained why he'd always called around 8 p.m. my time, claiming he was heading to bed after a grueling day of panels and networking. I remembered Tuesday night's conversation particularly clearly. He called around 8:30 p.m., claiming he was exhausted from a day of presentations. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he'd asked, and I'd told him about the gala preparations, the last-minute donor confirmations, my excitement about the silent auction items we'd secured. "You work too hard?" he'd said, his voice warm with what I'd interpreted as loving concern. "Promise me you'll take a break after the gala." In the background, I'd heard what sounded like waves and distant music. "Where are you calling from?" I'd asked. "Hotel bar," he'd said smoothly. "Trying to wind down. Chicago's been brutal." The waves I'd heard weren't Lake Michigan. They were the Mediterranean Sea lapping against the Hotel Palazzo Avino's infinity pool, where Meredith was probably waiting for him to return from his fake check-in call to his wife. I accessed Robert's business calendar through our shared systems, something I did regularly, to coordinate foundation events around his schedule. The Chicago trip was meticulously documented: Midwest Financial Leadership Conference, Chicago Union Club Luncheon, Willis Tower Strategy Session. But when I clicked on the individual calendar entries, they contained no actual details, no meeting locations, no contact information, no follow-up tasks. For someone as obsessively detailed as Robert, this was completely out of character. His normal calendar entries included specific addresses, agenda items, and post-meeting action plans. The Chicago calendar was a shell, a facade, designed to satisfy a casual glance, but containing no substance whatsoever. My town car pulled into the circular driveway of our Greenwich, Connecticut estate, the 8,000-square-foot colonial that had been featured in Architectural Digest's Financial Titans at Home spread just last year. Robert and I standing on our grand staircase, me in a conservative St. John's suit, him in his custom Brooks Brothers, both of us smiling the practiced smile of New York's power couple. "Will Mr. Harrington be joining you for dinner tonight, ma'am?" asked Martin, our longtime driver. As he opened my door, "No, Martin, Robert is still in Chicago." Except he wasn't. He was probably at that moment enjoying a late dinner on a terrace in Italy with his 32-year-old assistant, both of them laughing at how easily I'd been deceived. Shall I tell Mrs. Reynolds to prepare something light? He asked, referring to our housekeeper. No, thank you. I'm not hungry. As I walked up the steps to the front door, I realized this couldn't be Meredith's first mistake. You don't accidentally send dozens of intimate vacation photos to your boss's wife. That level of carelessness suggested comfort, familiarity, a relationship that had moved beyond the careful boundaries of a new affair. How long had this been going on? The Amalfi trip was clearly not their first romantic getaway. The ease with which they posed together, the intimate familiarity in their body language, suggested months, perhaps years, of practice. I thought about Meredith's behavior over the past 2 years, the late nights when she'd stayed to help Robert with urgent projects, the weekend work sessions at our home when I'd served them coffee and homemade scones while they huddled over laptops in our library, the way she'd started dressing more stylishly, her conservative business attire gradually giving way to designer pieces that seemed expensive for an assistant's salary. Had they been laughing at me, the naive wife serving refreshments to her husband's mistress? My phone buzzed with a message from Robert. Running late tonight. Don't wait up. Big presentation tomorrow. Tomorrow, the Veterans Honor Gala, his keynote speech about integrity and community service. I stared at the message, then back at the Amalfi photos, still loaded on my laptop screen. Meredith in my husband's arms, Meredith wearing jewelry purchased with charity funds, Meredith living the romantic vacation I've been begging for while I worked 14-hour days organizing events to honor wounded veterans. For 25 years, I've been the supportive character in Robert's success story, the devoted wife, the charitable foundation director, the perfect social hostess who enhanced his reputation and opened doors through her family connections. But looking at these photos, I realized something with crystal clarity. I wasn't just the supporting character in his professional life. I was the mark in his personal con game. Tomorrow night, that would change. 400 of New York's most influential people would gather to celebrate service and philanthropy. Robert would stand at that podium talking about integrity and authentic leadership while his mistress sat in the audience, probably wearing more jewelry purchased with stolen charity funds. But first, I had work to do. If Robert wanted to play elaborate games with carefully constructed alibis and social media deception, he was about to learn that 25 years of marriage had taught me a few things about strategy, too. I opened a new browser window and began researching everything I could find about Meredith Palmer. If she was going to make mistakes, I was going to make sure they were much bigger than accidentally sending photos. What I discovered over the next 3 hours of methodical investigation made Meredith's accidental photo message look like a minor oversight compared to the systematic deception I was about to uncover. I'd always prided myself on being detail-oriented, a skill that made me an effective foundation director and event planner. Now, I was about to put those same analytical abilities to work as a detective in my own marriage. I started with what I had access to: our shared business systems, joint financial accounts, and Robert's surprisingly careless digital footprint. 25 years of marriage had given me legitimate access to most of our integrated technology systems, and Robert's confidence in my loyalty had made him sloppy about digital security. His laptop was still logged into our home wireless network from his last working session in our library before his Chicago trip. I accessed our cloud storage account, ostensibly to review foundation documents, but instead began systematically examining Robert's travel patterns over the past 2 years. The first red flag appeared immediately: a pattern of business trips that coincided perfectly with Meredith's vacation requests. Cross-referencing her employment records, which I had access to as foundation director reviewing company integration, I discovered that every one of Meredith's personal days aligned with Robert's critical client meetings in various cities. March. Meredith requested 4 personal days. Robert flew to San Francisco for a West Coast client intensive. May Meredith took a long weekend. Robert attended the Vancouver Investment Summit. July, Meredith used 5 vacation days. Robert spent a week at Miami Strategy Retreat. September, Meredith's Italy vacation request. Robert's Chicago Financial Leadership Conference. But the travel correlation was just the beginning. The financial evidence was far more damning and complex than I'd initially realized. Robert hadn't just used foundation funds for the Amalfi trip, he'd been systematically embezzling money for over a year. Our foundation operated with a discretionary fund for emergency veteran support grants. We could approve quickly for time-sensitive needs, like medical equipment or housing assistance. The fund typically maintained a balance of $250,000 replenished quarterly from our major donor contributions. Robert had been making unauthorized withdrawals from this fund, disguising them as grants to fictitious veterans organizations. Northeast Veterans Leadership Development received $45,000 in March, the same month he and Meredith traveled to San Francisco. American Heroes Support Initiative, was awarded $38,000 in July, precisely the cost of their Miami getaway. The fictitious organizations were sophisticated forgeries. Robert had created fake websites, registered domain names, and established bank accounts that looked legitimate on cursory inspection. But when I dug deeper, every organization traced back to a single registered agent, Hudson Valley Consulting, a business entity I'd never heard of, but that was clearly connected to Robert, armed with Robert's travel schedule and Meredith's vacation requests. I began calling hotels directly. I'd learned from 25 years of event planning that hospitality staff often remembered unusual guest situations, especially when charm and persistence were applied correctly. The Fairmont San Francisco confirmed that Mr. and Mrs. Harrington had stayed in their presidential suite in March, except Mrs. Harrington wasn't me. The description matched Meredith perfectly young, blonde, approximately 32 years old, very affectionate with Mr. Harrington. The Four Seasons Vancouver verified a similar booking in May. The Ritz-Carlton Miami had records of an extended stay in July, complete with spa treatments charged to the room and romantic dinner reservations for two. Each hotel detail painted the same picture. Robert wasn't just having an affair with Meredith, he was introducing her as his wife, creating an alternate reality where their relationship was legitimate and established. Robert's Instagram profile told one story, but Meredith's private Instagram account, which I accessed through mutual business connections, revealed another. While Robert posted carefully curated business content, Meredith's personal account showed glimpses of luxury experiences that far exceeded her assistant's salary. Designer handbags photographed in upscale restaurants, wine tastings at exclusive vineyards, weekend getaways to expensive resorts, and tellingly, several photos where a masculine hand or partial figure appeared in frame, always cropped to avoid revealing the man's identity, but the watch, the wedding ring, the familiar sleeve of Robert's favorite Brioni jacket were unmistakable. Meredith had been documenting their entire relationship on social media, just carefully enough to avoid direct identification, but obviously enough that anyone looking would understand she was involved with someone wealthy and established. I called Harrington Global Advisors office manager, Julia Winters, under the pretense of coordinating next week's foundation board meeting. Julia had worked for the company for 12 years and was famously observant about office dynamics. "Oh, Catherine, I'm so glad you called," Julia said immediately. "I've been wanting to talk to someone about some concerns." My heart stopped. "What kind of concerns?" "Well, it's probably nothing, but Meredith's been different lately, more confident, I suppose. She's been making decisions about Robert's calendar that she never used to make, and she's been quite resistant when I've tried to coordinate with you directly about his schedule," Julia continued, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "And there have been some unusual expense reports, travel costs, that don't quite add up. Restaurant bills for two when Robert claims to have been dining alone with clients. I processed the company credit card statements, and some of these charges are questionable." By 11 p.m. that Thursday evening, I'd assembled a comprehensive picture of systematic betrayal that went far beyond a simple affair. Robert and Meredith had been operating as if they were married, using my foundation's funds to finance their parallel life, while I unknowingly provided the perfect cover story. Robert's business trips weren't just alibis for romance. They were elaborate fantasy getaways where he could play house with his young mistress, introducing her as his wife and using stolen charity money to fund their luxury lifestyle. But perhaps most devastating was realizing how long this had been going on, 2 years of calculated deception. 2 years of me organizing charity events, managing foundation business, and hosting client dinners while my husband built an entire alternate life with his assistant. Tomorrow night, 400 of New York's business elite would gather to celebrate service and philanthropy. Robert would deliver his keynote about integrity in leadership and community service. Meredith would likely attend as his professional assistant, playing her role perfectly while knowing they'd share a hotel room afterward, using foundation funds. But I had something they didn't know. I possessed complete documentation of their fraud, evidence of their systematic theft from charitable funds, and, most importantly, access to the same audiovisual technology that would broadcast Robert's speech about integrity to the entire assembled audience. Meredith's accidental photo message had been a mistake, but I was about to turn it into the catalyst for the most spectacular public accounting of deception New York's social elite had ever witnessed. By 2 a.m. Friday morning, I'd uncovered a web of deception so intricate and systematic that it made me question everything I thought I knew about my husband's character. What had started as investigating one suspicious vacation had evolved into documenting a 2-year campaign of financial fraud, identity theft, and elaborate relationship manipulation that reached far beyond a simple affair. Spread across my home office desk were printed bank statements, credit card records, travel confirmations, and screenshots that painted a disturbing picture of calculated betrayal. Using colored highlighters, yellow for financial fraud, pink for travel deception, blue for fake business activities, I created a timeline that revealed the true scope of Robert and Meredith's operation. January 2023. The first suspicious charge appeared. Veterans Educational Excellence Network received a $25,000 grant from our foundation's emergency fund. The organization's website looked legitimate, but listed no physical address, no staff directory, and no actual programs. The bank account for this fictitious charity traced back to an account controlled by Hudson Valley Consulting, Robert's shell company. February 2023, Meredith received her first performance bonus, a $25,000 payment that supposedly rewarded her exceptional organizational skills. The same week, Robert booked their first romantic getaway to Napa Valley, using foundation funds disguised as a West Coast Veterans Outreach Initiative. March through September 2023, the pattern accelerated. Every 6 to 8 weeks, a new fake charity would receive a substantial grant ranging from $30,000 to $50,000. Within days, Robert and Meredith would embark on another business trip to luxury destinations across North America and Europe. The financial sophistication was impressive and terrifying. Robert hadn't just stolen money, he'd created an entire parallel accounting system that could withstand casual scrutiny, while systematically embezzling over $400,000 from charitable funds intended for wounded veterans. But the financial fraud was only part of the story. My investigation revealed that Robert and Meredith had been living as husband and wife during their travels, complete with fake identification and carefully constructed backstories. Meredith's Instagram posts, when examined chronologically, showed her gradually adopting elements of my identity. She'd started wearing her hair in my signature style. Her clothing choices began mirroring my aesthetic preferences. Most disturbingly, she'd been photographed wearing replicas of jewelry Robert had given me during our early marriage years, pieces she couldn't possibly afford on her assistant's salary. The hotel registrations told an even more chilling story. At each destination, they checked in as Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, with Meredith using a fake ID that listed her as Catherine Harrington. Robert had somehow obtained fraudulent identification documents that allowed his mistress to literally assume my identity while they played house across the country. During their Miami trip in July, they'd attended a charity auction at the Perez Art Museum as the Harringtons, bidding on expensive artwork and socializing with other wealthy couples. Meredith had worn a dress identical to one I'd worn to a New York charity event the previous year, styled her hair exactly like mine, and even adopted my mannerisms. Based on the event photos I found on the museum's social media accounts, they weren't just having an affair. Robert was systematically replacing me with a younger version while using my own foundation's money to finance the transition. The investigation revealed that Robert's business trips weren't random romantic getaways. They were strategic networking opportunities where he was positioning Meredith as his wife to potential clients and business partners. He'd been using our charitable foundation's reputation and my family's social connections to expand his business network while simultaneously planning my replacement. In Vancouver, they'd attended a private equity conference where Robert introduced Meredith as his business partner and wife to several potential investors. The conference materials listed Mr. and Mrs. Harrington as attendees, with Meredith's bio describing her as co-founder of Harrington Foundation and strategic development specialist. In Miami, they'd met with clients from our established business network people who knew me personally. Robert had apparently explained my absence by claiming I was focusing on expanding our East Coast operations, while Meredith charmed these clients with detailed knowledge about our foundation's work and business history. The most devastating discovery was an email thread I found in Robert's encrypted folder between him and James Donovan, a major client from our Boston office. Donovan had written, "Catherine seems different, more energetic, and engaged. The foundation work clearly agrees with her. We should schedule a formal dinner when we're in New York next month." James Donovan, who'd attended our 20th anniversary party 3 years ago, who'd had dinner at our home numerous times, who'd known me for over a decade, had spent an entire evening with Meredith thinking she was me and noticed only that I seemed more energetic. Perhaps most disturbing was realizing how Robert had been psychologically preparing me for my own replacement over the past 2 years. He'd been subtly undermining my confidence while encouraging Meredith to adopt my professional responsibilities. Robert had gradually redirected foundation communications through Meredith, claiming it was more efficient for her to handle routine correspondence. He'd suggested that I was overworked and should delegate more responsibilities to her. He'd praised Meredith's initiative while subtly criticizing my attention to detail, my event planning choices, and my social networking strategies. Looking back with new understanding, I realized Robert had been gaslighting me into believing I was becoming less competent, less relevant, less necessary to our foundation's operations. While I've been questioning my own abilities, Meredith had been systematically learning my job, my social connections, and even my personal style. The timeline revealed that Robert's plan was nearing completion. Based on the financial transfers and business communications I'd discovered, he intended to officially replace me as foundation director within the next 6 months, installing Meredith in my position while maintaining access to the charitable funds and social connections that had made our embezzlement scheme possible. Tomorrow night's charity gala wasn't just another social event, it was supposed to be Meredith's official debut as the new Mrs. Harrington. With me potentially being phased out of the foundation and social circle I'd spent 25 years building. But Robert had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that 25 years of marriage had made me passive, trusting, and dependent on his leadership. He'd underestimated what 25 years of event planning, foundation management, and social networking had taught me about strategy, coordination, and public presentation. Tomorrow night, 400 of New York's business elite would indeed witness the debut of the real Mrs. Harrington, just not the one Robert was expecting. I sat in my darkened home office at 3:30 a.m., surrounded by the evidence of my husband's systematic betrayal, and felt something profound shift inside me. It wasn't the heartbreak I'd expected, though. The pain was certainly there, sharp and constant, like a broken rib. It wasn't even the rage that had fueled my investigation for the past 13 hours. What I felt was something much more dangerous to Robert's carefully constructed world: absolute clarity. For 25 years, I've been living inside a beautiful lie. The devoted husband who brought me tea every morning had been calculating each gesture for maximum manipulation. The business partner who valued my insights had been systematically undermining my confidence while training my replacement. The man who'd promised to build something lasting together had been planning my disposal from the moment his alternate plan became viable. But the most devastating realization wasn't about Robert's betrayal. It was about my own complicity in my diminishment. I'd been so invested in maintaining our perfect image that I'd ignored every warning sign, rationalized every inconsistency, and gradually accepted a smaller and smaller role in my own life. When had I stopped questioning Robert's decisions? When had I started seeking his approval for choices I used to make independently? When had I begun believing his subtle criticisms about my judgment, my social skills, my professional competence? The evidence spread across my desk told the story of a woman being slowly erased from her own existence. Every foundation decision increasingly routed through Meredith. Every social engagement gradually shifted to prioritize Robert's networking over my established relationships. Every financial choice designed to increase my dependence on his business success. I'd been so busy being the perfect wife that I'd forgotten to be myself. But 25 years of marriage to a master manipulator had taught me something Robert never intended. I'd learned his methods by osmosis. Event planning had honed my attention to detail. Foundation management had taught me financial oversight. Social networking had made me an expert at reading people and situations. Now I was going to use every skill he'd helped me develop to destroy the empire we'd built together. The beauty of Robert's plan was also its fatal flaw. He'd been so methodical, so documented, so confident in his control that he created a perfect paper trail of his own destruction. Every fake charity, every fraudulent expense report, every stolen dollar was meticulously recorded in systems I had legitimate access to. Tomorrow night's charity gala wasn't just a social event. It was the perfect stage for Robert's public destruction. 400 of New York's most influential business leaders gathered to celebrate integrity and service would witness the most spectacular exposure of corporate fraud in the city's recent history. But before I could execute any plan for Robert's public humiliation, I had to confront a more personal truth. I was terrified of losing the identity I built around being his wife. Mrs. Robert Harrington commanded respect in New York's social circles. Catherine Harrington, foundation director, had credibility and influence. But who was Catherine without the Harrington empire? Who was I before I became half of New York's golden power couple? I walked through our Greenwich mansion in the pre-dawn darkness, seeing it now as the stage set it had always been. The professional photography in the library captured a performance, not a partnership. The awards and accolades on display celebrated a fiction, not an achievement. The carefully curated rooms showcased a lifestyle designed to impress rather than a home designed to nurture. Even our bedroom felt foreign now, the king-sized bed where Robert had made love to me twice a week, with practiced efficiency while saving his passion for his young mistress. The sitting area where we'd reviewed foundation proposals while he secretly planned to replace me with Meredith. The walk-in closet filled with clothes chosen to complement his public image rather than express my personal style. I've been performing the role of Robert's wife so successfully that I'd lost track of who Catherine actually was underneath the performance. Standing in our kitchen at 4:30 a.m., Making coffee in the French press Robert had bought because it matched our kitchen aesthetic, I made a decision that would change everything I was done performing. Tomorrow night, I would give New York's business community the most authentic performance of my life, the revelation of who Robert Harrington really was. But more importantly, I would begin the process of discovering who Catherine was underneath 25 years of careful image management. I opened my laptop and began drafting a different kind of plan, not just the public exposure of Robert's fraud, but the strategic dismantling of everything that had made his deception possible. If he wanted to replace me, he was welcome to try, but he would do it without access to my family's money, my social connections, or the foundation I built with my own reputation and relationships. The Harrington Empire had been built on the foundation of my inheritance, my social networks, and my family's credibility. Robert had been so focused on stealing foundation funds and training Meredith to mimic my social role that he'd forgotten a crucial detail: the Empire's true foundation belonged to me, not him. By dawn, I drafted a comprehensive strategy that went far beyond exposing Robert's affair. I would systematically reclaim every asset, every relationship, and every opportunity he'd appropriated for his parallel life with Meredith. The legal dissolution of our marriage would be swift and financially devastating for him. The professional consequences would end his consulting career. The social humiliation would ensure he could never rebuild his reputation in New York's tight-knit business community. But first, there was tonight's gala to prepare for. I showered and dressed with the same meticulous attention to detail I'd applied to 25 years of public appearances as Robert's wife, but this time, every choice was authentic to who I was discovering myself to be. The dress I selected wasn't chosen to complement Robert's image, it was chosen to project my own power and independence. The jewelry I wore wasn't gifted by my husband, it was inherited from my grandmother, symbols of female strength that predated my marriage, as I prepared for what would be my final performance as Mrs. Robert Harrington. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my own future. Not our future, not the Harrington Empire's future, but mine. Robert was about to learn that the woman he'd been systematically underestimating for 2 years was far more dangerous than the naive wife he'd been planning to discard. Friday morning arrived with the crystalline clarity that only comes after a sleepless night of complete revelation. I sat in my home office, coffee growing cold as I methodically planned what would either be the most spectacular vindication or the most catastrophic mistake of my life. The charity gala was 10 hours away, and I had work to do. First, I needed to understand the Plaza Hotel's audiovisual capabilities. I'd coordinated with their events team dozens of times over the years, but tonight required a more intimate knowledge of their systems. I called Thomas Reed, the hotel's senior AV technician, someone I'd worked with on multiple foundation events. "Catherine, looking forward to tonight's gala," Thomas said cheerfully. "Everything's set up exactly as you specified: the 98-inch 4K displays, the wireless presentation system, the backup projectors. Your husband's keynote should look spectacular." "Thomas, I need to ask a technical question," I said carefully. "How exactly does the wireless presentation system work? Could someone theoretically override the main presentation from a mobile device?" "Well, yes. If they have the admin credentials, the system's designed for flexibility. Multiple presenters can queue up content, and the primary administrator can control what displays when. You have the admin access codes, since you're the event coordinator." "Perfect. And these displays, they're connected to the ballroom's main sound system. Absolutely full audiovisual integration. Whatever appears on screen will have synchronized audio if there's any embedded in the content." I thanked Thomas and hung up, making notes about the presentation system's capabilities. Robert's keynote about integrity and service would be delivered through a microphone connected to speakers that could reach every corner of the grand ballroom. The irony was so perfect, it felt like destiny. Next, I spent 3 hours creating a comprehensive digital presentation of Robert and Meredith's fraud, not just the Amalfi photos that had started this investigation, but the complete timeline of their deception. Bank statements showing the fraudulent charity transfers, hotel receipts documenting their travels as Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, screenshots of Meredith's Instagram posts wearing replicas of my jewelry, images from charity events where Meredith had literally impersonated me, but the centerpiece would be a recorded video I discovered on Robert's laptop, a private moment from their Miami trip, where Meredith was modeling the diamond tennis bracelet I'd been denied, while Robert explained how he convinced his naive wife that it was too expensive for their budget. The audio was crystal clear, including Robert's laugh as he described how easily I believed his financial constraints while he funded their luxury lifestyle with stolen charity money. I organized everything into a 20-minute presentation that told the complete story of their systematic betrayal. The evidence was so comprehensive, so undeniably documented. that even Robert's considerable charm couldn't explain it away. While working on the presentation, I called Elena Rodriguez, the most ruthless divorce attorney in New York. Her reputation for destroying unfaithful husbands in high-profile divorces was legendary, and I wanted her locked in before Robert realized he needed legal representation. "I've been expecting your call," Elena said when I reached her at home. "Word travels fast in our circles, and Robert's recent behavior has been noticeable." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "He's been asking colleagues about asset protection strategies, offshore accounts, business dissolution procedures, the kind of questions that suggest someone's preparing for a contentious divorce. He's been planning this exit for months." "Catherine?" The confirmation that Robert had been strategically preparing to abandon our marriage while I planned charity events was almost liberating. No more guilt about destroying his reputation. No more hesitation about the nuclear option I was contemplating. Elena and I spent an hour reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. The embezzlement charges alone would be enough to destroy him professionally and financially, but combined with identity fraud, tax evasion, and breach of fiduciary duty, Robert was looking at potential criminal charges that could result in years of prison time. The guest list for tonight's gala read like New York's business and social elite directory: 400 of the most influential people in the Northeast, including venture capitalists, tech executives, media personalities, and political leaders. The kind of crowd that could make or break reputations with a single conversation. I carefully reviewed the seating arrangements I'd meticulously planned months ago. Robert's keynote would be delivered from the main stage, with premium tables arranged in a semicircle for maximum impact. The Harrington Foundation's board members were seated at the head table, including my family members who'd been instrumental in providing the seed funding Robert had been embezzling. Meredith would be seated at table 12, positioned perfectly for the cameras that would be recording Robert's speech for the Foundation's website and social media accounts. She'd have a clear view of the presentation screens and would be visible to the entire ballroom when the truth was revealed. But perhaps most importantly, I spent time preparing myself psychologically for what was about to happen. This wasn't just exposing Robert's fraud, it was publicly destroying the life I'd spent 25 years building. The Harrington Empire, our social standing, our charitable reputation, everything would be obliterated along with Robert's deception. I called my closest friend, someone who'd known me since college and had occasionally questioned Robert's treatment of me over the years, without revealing my plans. I asked her to attend tonight's gala and to please stay close afterward, regardless of what happened. I also drafted letters to the Harrington Foundation's major donors, explaining the situation and my plan to establish a new charitable organization once the legal issues were resolved. I wouldn't let Robert's fraud destroy the good work we'd accomplished for wounded veterans, even if it meant starting over from scratch. As afternoon approached, I made final preparations for what would be the last public appearance of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Harrington. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, the midnight blue Carolina Herrera gown I'd worn to our 20th anniversary celebration, back when I still believed we were building something beautiful together. Tonight, it would serve as a farewell to the woman I'd been and a debut for who I was becoming. The presentation was loaded onto my phone, ready to upload to the hotel's wireless system at the precise moment Robert began speaking about integrity and authentic service. The legal documents were prepared for filing Monday morning. The evidence was organized for immediate delivery to law enforcement. Robert had spent 2 years methodically planning my replacement and disposal. Tonight, I would show him what 25 years of underestimating me had cost him. In 6 hours, New York's business elite would witness either the most spectacular vindication or the most catastrophic implosion in the city's social history. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the outcome. Whatever happened next, it would be authentically mine. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom had never looked more magnificent, and I'd never felt more dangerous. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory linens, each centerpiece a perfect arrangement of white roses and silver accents that I'd personally approved months ago. 400 of New York's most influential business leaders mingled with champagne flutes, their conversations creating the sophisticated buzz of successful people celebrating success. But tonight, success would have a very different definition. I stood near the entrance in my midnight blue Carolina Herrera gown, greeting guests with the practiced smile I perfected over 25 years of charity events. To everyone present, I was simply Catherine Harrington, the gracious foundation director, hosting another flawless gala. They had no idea they were about to witness the most spectacular public destruction of a marriage in New York's social history. "Catherine, darling, everything looks absolutely perfect," gushed Margaret Whitfield, the wife of Goldman Sachs's board member who'd been instrumental in our early business development. Her diamond necklace caught the light as she gestured toward the elegant room setup. Robert must be so proud of what you've accomplished with the foundation. Thank you, Margaret. Robert certainly appreciates service, I replied, the irony tasting bitter on my tongue as I watched my husband across the room, completely unaware that his perfect wife had spent the last 36 hours becoming his most dangerous enemy. Speaking of which, he should be beginning his keynote soon. Across the ballroom, I spotted Meredith at table 12, wearing a black cocktail dress that looked suspiciously similar to one I'd worn to last year's Metropolitan Museum Gala. She was chatting animatedly with New York Tech Council members, playing her role as Robert's professional assistant while secretly being his personal mistress and criminal partner. Her confidence was remarkable. 2 years of stealing my husband, my identity, and my foundation's money had given her quite the sense of security. She had no idea that every person she was charming tonight would soon see her vacation photos with my husband, purchased with money stolen from veterans' support funds. Robert stood near the head table, working the room with his trademark charisma. He looked distinguished in his custom tuxedo, every inch the successful CEO that New York's business community admired. His platinum cufflinks, a gift from my father when we married, gleamed as he gestured while speaking to venture capitalists about authentic leadership. He caught my eye across the room and smiled, raising his champagne flute in a small salute to our partnership, the same smile he'd given me every morning for 25 years while planning my systematic replacement. The same charm he'd used to convince me I was overreacting to his increasingly suspicious behavior. If only he knew that his devoted wife had spent the last 36 hours transforming into the person who would destroy everything he'd built through 25 years of calculated manipulation. Ladies and gentlemen, the hotel's events coordinator announced through the discreet wireless microphone system I'd personally specified during planning. Please take your seats. Mr. Robert Harrington will begin his keynote address in 5 minutes. The announcement triggered a wave of movement across the ballroom as 400 guests made their way to their assigned tables. I'd spent weeks perfecting the seating arrangements major donors near the front, media representatives strategically positioned for optimal photography angles, and Meredith placed precisely where the cameras recording Robert's speech would capture her reaction when her world exploded. I fell for my phone in my evening clutch, ensuring the presentation was ready to upload. My hands were surprisingly steady. 25 years of public speaking and event management had trained me well for moments of high pressure. But tonight was different. Tonight I wasn't performing Robert's version of Catherine Harrington. Tonight I was about to reveal exactly who I really was, underneath 25 years of careful image management. As guests settled into their seats, I made my way to the lighting booth where Thomas Reed was making final adjustments to the audio-visual system, the same system I'd coordinated the installation of 3 years ago, never imagining I'd someday use it to broadcast my husband's crimes to New York's entire business elite. Everything ready for Mr. Harrington's presentation? I asked, my voice casual despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Absolutely, Mrs. Harrington. The wireless system is active, and your admin credentials are loaded. The 98-inch displays are crystal clear 4K resolution, means every detail will be visible from anywhere in the ballroom. Whenever you're ready to begin the presentation, it'll display automatically on all screens. Perfect. And Thomas, no matter what happens during the presentation, please don't interrupt the system until I give you the signal. He looked puzzled but nodded. Of course, Mrs. Harrington. Whatever you need. I walked back toward the main ballroom, watching Robert approach the podium as applause filled the space. He looked confident, relaxed, completely unaware that his wife was about to destroy everything he'd built through 25 years of calculated manipulation and criminal activity. The irony was so perfect it felt orchestrated by fate itself. Robert Harrington, who'd built his career preaching about authentic leadership while systematically betraying every principle the phrase represented, was about to be exposed by the very technology and event planning expertise his wife had developed to support his success. Good evening, everyone, Robert began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system I'd specified. Tonight, I want to talk to you about something that's been central to my success, the power of authentic service. I opened my phone and accessed the hotel's presentation system. One touch of the screen would replace Robert's carefully prepared slides about business integrity with a comprehensive exhibition of his systematic fraud and betrayal. Robert continued, his voice warm with practiced sincerity. True service requires transparency, mutual respect, and absolute trust. It demands that we hold ourselves accountable to the highest standards of integrity, especially when no one is watching. I touched the screen. The first image that appeared on the ballroom's massive 98-inch screens was Meredith in her flowing white sundress, arms wrapped around Robert on a cliff overlooking the crystalline waters of Amalfi, both of them laughing with the carefree joy of lovers on a romantic holiday. The collective gasp from 400 guests was audible even over Robert's amplified voice, which faltered mid-sentence about absolute trust. What the hell? Robert spun toward the screens, his wireless presentation remote clattering to the floor as his face drained of color. The confident CEO disappeared, replaced by a man who suddenly understood that his perfect control had just evaporated in front of New York's entire business elite. But I wasn't finished. I was just getting started. The second slide appeared with devastating clarity, Meredith wearing the diamond tennis bracelet I'd admired for months, the same bracelet Robert had claimed we couldn't afford. Beside the image, the credit card statement showed the $12,780 purchase charge to Harrington Foundation's charitable account intended for veterans support. Turn it off, Robert hissed into his microphone, his panic broadcasting to every corner of the ballroom. Catherine, turn it off now. The third slide was even more damning hotel receipts from their Miami getaway, showing a $400 charge to the Harrington Foundation for the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton the same weekend Robert had told me he was visiting potential donors for our scholarship program. I remained standing near the lighting booth, watching 400 of New York's most influential people process what they were seeing in real time. Margaret Whitfield had her hand pressed to her chest in shock, her champagne flute forgotten on the table. The tech executives at Table 5 were already pulling out their phones to photograph the screens. Goldman Sachs board members were exchanging horrified glances, understanding immediately what this meant for their business relationship with Harrington Global Advisors. Meredith had gone completely white, shrinking into her chair as if she could disappear from the ballroom entirely. But there was nowhere to hide from 98-inch screens, displaying her intimate moments with my husband to 400 witnesses. The fourth slide was perhaps the most devastating of video clip I discovered on Robert's laptop from their Miami trip. Meredith modeling the stolen bracelet while Robert's voice played through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. My naive wife actually believed I couldn't afford it. She has no idea how much money flows through the foundation accounts. She's so trusting, it's almost pathetic. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. 400 people sat frozen, watching Robert Harrington, New York's golden boy of financial advisory. The man who'd just been preaching about integrity and authentic service exposed as a systematic fraud and embezzler on the screens behind him. This is taken out of context, Robert shouted, abandoning the podium and striding toward me, his carefully modulated speaking voice replaced by desperate panic. Catherine has had some emotional difficulties lately. This is a complete fabrication. But the evidence kept rolling, each slide more damning than the last. Bank statements showing 2 years of fraudulent charitable grants to fictitious organizations. Photos of Meredith and Robert registered as Mr. and Mrs. Harrington at luxury hotels across the country. Screenshots of Meredith's Instagram posts documenting their lavish lifestyle, funded by money stolen from wounded veterans. Hotel security guards moved discreetly toward Robert as he approached me, their presence a reminder that the plaza staff were trained to handle disruptions. But Robert stopped short when he saw my expression calm, resolved, completely in control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his ability to manipulate. 25 years, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the nearby tables as guests strained to hear every word. 25 years of building this foundation to help wounded veterans, and you've been stealing from them to fund your affair and criminal enterprise. The next slide appeared a comprehensive financial summary showing that Robert and Meredith had embezzled over $400,000 from the Harrington Foundation over 2 years, using the money to finance luxury vacations while posing as husband and wife and building a money laundering operation that stretched across 3 states. Meredith bolted from her table, pushing through the stunned crowd toward the ballroom exit, her designer heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. But photographers from the Wall Street Journal and New York Society magazines were already positioned near the doors, their cameras capturing every moment of her humiliated retreat. The woman who'd spent 2 years stealing my identity was about to become the most photographed scandal in New York social history. The audience erupted in a buzz of horrified conversations as the final slides continued displaying. Board members from multiple charitable organizations were pulling out phones to call their financial officers. Venture capitalists were already calculating the business implications of being associated with Robert's firm. Social media was lighting up as guests live tweeted the most spectacular corporate fraud exposure in Northeast history. Robert stood in the center of the ballroom, his carefully constructed reputation disintegrating in real time as 400 witnesses absorbed the full scope of his betrayal. The man who'd built his career on integrity and authentic service had been exposed as a systematic criminal in the most public forum possible. Mayor Thompson was already speaking quietly with his security detail, understanding that what we were witnessing wasn't just marital drama, it was documented corporate fraud that required immediate legal intervention. FBI agents would be called before the evening ended. The projector remote lay forgotten on the stage floor, but the damage was complete and irreversible. New York's business elite had witnessed the Harrington Empire's spectacular collapse, and there would be no recovering from this level of public humiliation and criminal exposure. As chaos erupted around us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 25 years: complete authenticity. For the first time since my wedding day, I wasn't performing a role or managing appearances. I was simply Catherine Harrington, finally telling the truth about who my husband really was. "You've destroyed everything," Robert hissed as he reached me, his voice low but trembling with rage. The ballroom behind us buzzed with shocked conversations as guests struggled to process what they witnessed. 25 years of building this reputation, this business, this life gone because of your jealous tantrum. I looked at him with the calm that comes from absolute moral clarity. "I destroyed nothing, Robert. I simply revealed what you built it on. This is manipulation of evidence, selective editing no one will believe. The bank statements," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "The hotel receipts, the video of you laughing about your naive wife, while Meredith wore jewelry stolen from charity funds. Which part would you like to claim is edited?" Robert's face contorted with the desperate expression of a cornered animal. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the expectations, the constant need to maintain appearances. Meredith was just stress relief. It didn't mean anything. Stress relief that cost our foundation $400,000, stress relief that required creating fake charities and fraudulent tax documents." I pulled out my phone and showed him screenshots of his encrypted emails. "Or was discussing your exit strategy with divorce attorneys also just stress relief?" His facade cracked completely. "You went through my private communications. You violated my privacy." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "I violated your privacy. You stole my identity." "Robert, Meredith has been traveling as Catherine Harrington for 2 years. Using fake identification, you helped her obtain. She attended charity events as me, met with our business partners as me, built relationships with people who thought they were meeting your wife." "That was never permanent," he said desperately. "It was just easier for business purposes. You're being dramatic about dramatic." I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. "You systematically embezzled money from wounded veterans to fund your affair. You psychologically manipulated me for 2 years, making me question my own competence while training my replacement. You planned to divorce me and steal everything I'd helped build." Which part of that should I respond to calmly, around us? Guests were beginning to approach, their faces a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. I could see William Whitfield making his way through the crowd, his expression grim. As a board member of both Goldman Sachs and our foundation, he understood exactly what Robert's fraud meant for our charitable operations. "Catherine." Robert tried one last manipulation, his voice softening into the tone he'd used to charm me for 25 years. "We can fix this. We can explain that it was a temporary arrangement, that the money will be repaid. Meredith means nothing to me. You're my wife, my partner. We built this together." I looked at this man I'd shared 25 years with and felt nothing but pity. "No, Robert, I built this. You just took credit for it while planning to steal it." William Whitfield reached us, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Robert, I think we need to have a conversation about your position with the foundation. Immediately." Behind him, I spotted 2 New York police officers entering the ballroom, summoned by someone who understood that what we'd witnessed wasn't just marital drama, it was documented corporate fraud requiring immediate legal intervention. Robert saw them too, and for the first time that evening, he looked genuinely afraid. 3 days after the gala, I sat in Elena Rodriguez's law office with boxes of evidence that made Robert's public humiliation look like a minor scandal compared to what we were about to uncover. The New York Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit had seized Robert's computers, but not before I'd made comprehensive copies of everything during my Thursday night investigation. "Catherine, this is far worse than embezzlement," Elena said, spreading documents across her conference table. "What your husband created was a sophisticated money laundering operation using charitable organizations as a front." Detective Marcus Walsh from the Financial Crimes Unit leaned forward. "We've traced the fake charities to a network of shell companies spanning 5 states. Robert wasn't just stealing from your foundation, he was using it as a hub for washing money from other questionable sources." I stared at the evidence, feeling sick. "What kind of sources?" offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, payments from clients who were likely evading taxes. Detective Walsh explained. The Harrington Foundation's sterling reputation provided perfect cover for moving money that couldn't be cleaned through normal business channels. Elena pulled out a thick folder. The worst part is how long this has been going on. We found evidence dating back 12 years, not 2. Robert has been using your foundation's credibility to legitimize illegal financial activities for most of your marriage. 12 years. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I reviewed all our financial statements. He created parallel accounting systems, Detective Walsh said. What you saw were sanitized reports showing legitimate charitable activities. The real transactions were hidden in encrypted files with separate banking relationships you never knew existed. The detective showed me printouts of bank statements from accounts I'd never seen before. Harrington Veterans Relief Fund, American Heroes Support Network, Northeastern Veterans Development Initiative, all organizations that appeared legitimate but were actually conduits for moving dirty money. Look at this, Elena pointed to a transaction report. Every time your foundation received a major donation from a legitimate source, Robert would create a matching fake donation from one of his shell companies. Your real donors were unknowingly providing cover for money laundering operations. I thought about all the charity galas I'd organized, all the major donors I'd cultivated, all the legitimate veteran support initiatives we'd funded. So, everything we accomplished for veterans was still real, I asked quietly. Your foundation did help hundreds of veterans, Detective Walsh assured me. But Robert was using those legitimate activities to justify much larger financial flows that had nothing to do with charity. Elena pulled out another file. This explains Meredith's role, too. She wasn't just his mistress, she was his operational partner. Look at these travel records. The documents showed that Meredith's vacations with Robert weren't just romantic getaways. They were business trips to meet with offshore banking contacts, cryptocurrency brokers, and clients seeking financial services that skirted legal boundaries. Meredith has an MBA in international finance, Detective Walsh explained. She wasn't hired as Robert's assistant. She was recruited as his money laundering specialist. The affair was probably secondary to their business partnership. I stared at photos of Meredith and Robert meeting with various individuals in expensive restaurants across the country. So, when I thought I was discovering an affair, you were actually uncovering a criminal enterprise, Elena finished. Robert married you for your family's credibility and social connections, then spent 25 years building a money laundering operation using your foundation as cover. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Not only had Robert never loved me, he married me specifically to gain access to the respectability needed for serious financial crimes. What does this mean legally? I asked. Detective Walsh looked grim. Robert is looking at federal charges: money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, racketeering. We're talking about potential decades in prison. And Meredith, she's already been arrested, apparently. She thought fleeing the country would help, but international money laundering leaves a very clear trail. 2 weeks after Robert's arrest, I discovered that our foundation wasn't his only target. It was just the most successful node in a network of charitable fraud that stretched across the Northeast. The FBI's investigation had uncovered a systematic operation that exploited the trust and credibility of multiple nonprofit organizations. Mrs. Harrington, we need to show you something, FBI Special Agent Sarah Reeves said, spreading aerial photographs across my dining room table. The images showed luxury properties in Martha's Vineyard, Palm Beach, and the Cayman Islands, all purchased through shell companies connected to Robert's operation. These properties were bought with money stolen from 7 different charitable organizations. Agent Reeves explained, your foundation was the flagship, but Robert and Meredith were running similar schemes with environmental groups, animal welfare organizations, and educational foundations across 5 states. I stared at a photo of a beachfront mansion in Grand Cayman. How many other women like me were there? At least 5 that we've identified so far. She replied grimly, all married to men running consulting firms that managed charitable organizations, all with family money and social connections that provided credibility, all kept in the dark while their husbands built criminal enterprises using their foundations as cover. Agent Reeves showed me surveillance photos of Robert meeting with other men in expensive restaurants. Your husband was essentially franchising his model. He taught other consultants how to marry into established families, gain control of charitable organizations, and use them for money laundering operations. The scope was staggering. So this was never about business success or social status. It was about creating the perfect cover for financial crimes. She confirmed, Robert specifically targeted you because your family's reputation in New York made the Harrington Foundation above suspicion. No one investigates charities run by old money families with impeccable social credentials. I learned that Meredith wasn't Robert's first criminal partner either. Over the past 12 years, he'd worked with 4 different women, all recruited for their financial expertise and willingness to participate in illegal activities. Meredith was simply the most recent and most ambitious. The other wives, I asked, did they know? 2 of them suspected something but were too afraid to investigate. One discovered the truth and was threatened into silence. You're the first who decided to fight back publicly. Agent Reeves pulled out a thick file. Because of your courage in exposing this at the gala, we've been able to unravel the entire network. Without that public revelation forcing Robert to panic and attempt to destroy evidence, we might never have discovered how extensive this operation was. The investigation had revealed that Robert's network had stolen over $12 million from charitable organizations, money that should have funded veteran support, environmental protection, and social services across the region. Hundreds of legitimate projects have been compromised or canceled because of their systematic theft. What happens to the other foundations? I asked. Most will be able to recover once we seize the criminal assets, the properties, the offshore accounts, the luxury items. Everything will be liquidated and returned to the legitimate charitable organizations they robbed. But perhaps most disturbing was learning that Robert had been planning to expand the operation nationally. They had identified potential targets in major cities across the country. Wealthy women with family foundations who could be manipulated into providing cover for increasingly sophisticated financial crimes. You stopped something that was about to become much larger, Agent Reeves said. Your decision to expose Robert publicly prevented this network from expanding to victimize dozens of other foundations and hundreds of other families. I realized that Meredith's accidental photo message hadn't just exposed one affair, it had unraveled a criminal conspiracy that threatened the integrity of charitable giving throughout the country. 1 month after the gala disaster, I sat across from New York's top federal prosecutor, reviewing the criminal case that would likely send my husband to prison for the next 30 years. But more importantly, I was building a strategy to ensure that none of the other victims in Robert's network would face the financial devastation that typically follows charitable fraud scandals. Mrs. Harrington, your cooperation has been instrumental, U.S. Attorney David Holbrook said, closing a thick file. But I want to prepare you for what's coming. Robert's defense team will try to paint you as a co-conspirator who's now attempting to avoid responsibility. I'd expected this. Robert's new attorney, expensive enough to suggest he'd hidden more money than we'd initially discovered, had already leaked stories to friendly reporters suggesting I'd known about the financial irregularities all along. My documentation proves otherwise, I replied, sliding across a folder. Every decision I made regarding foundation finances has a paper trail showing Robert's approval was required. Every major transaction I initiated can be traced to his explicit authorization. Elena Martinez leaned forward. Catherine's been documenting everything meticulously since this started. We have recordings of Robert threatening her, attempting to manipulate her testimony, and offering bribes through intermediaries to remain silent. Recordings? Attorney Holbrook looked intrigued. Robert apparently believed that 25 years of marriage had made me helplessly dependent on his guidance. I explained. He kept calling me from jail, providing detailed instructions about how to manage the federal investigation. He never considered that someone who'd organized hundreds of charity events might understand the value of documentation. The recordings were devastating to Robert's defense. In his own voice, he'd admitted to the systematic embezzlement, explained how he'd psychologically manipulated me to prevent discovery, and outlined plans to intimidate other victims in his network to prevent them from cooperating with federal investigators. What about asset recovery? I asked. This was the crucial issue. 7 charitable organizations had been devastated by Robert's network, and hundreds of legitimate programs faced cancellation unless we could recover the stolen funds. This is where your background becomes invaluable, Attorney Holbrook said. We need someone with credibility in the nonprofit sector to coordinate the victim organizations, help track down hidden assets, and eventually oversee the distribution of recovered funds. I've been hoping he would ask. Over the past month, I've been quietly networking with the other victimized foundations, building relationships with their boards, and developing a comprehensive strategy for institutional recovery that went far beyond simple financial restitution. I've already been working with the other organizations, I admitted. We formed an informal consortium to share information, coordinate legal strategies, and develop better oversight procedures to prevent future fraud. Elena smiled. Catherine's essentially created a new consulting specialty, helping charitable organizations recover from systematic fraud. She's already been approached by nonprofits in Boston and Philadelphia who've discovered similar vulnerabilities. The irony wasn't lost on me. Robert had spent 25 years using my social connections and organizational skills to facilitate criminal activity. Now I was using those same abilities to help victims recover from his crimes and prevent similar fraud from destroying other charitable organizations. There's something else, Attorney Holbrook said, producing another file. We've identified other women in similar situations across the country, wives of men running charitable organizations who've discovered financial irregularities but are afraid to come forward because of threats, intimidation, or financial dependence. I thought about the 5 other wives Agent Reeves had mentioned, women who'd suspected their husband's criminal activities but felt powerless to act. They need support, legal protection, and probably most importantly, proof that they can survive financially and socially after exposing their husband's crimes. Exactly. Would you be willing to serve as a resource for these women, help them understand their options, connect them with appropriate legal representation, and provide guidance about protecting themselves during the investigation process? I realized that Robert's betrayal had inadvertently created a new purpose for my life. Instead of being the perfect wife facilitating someone else's success, I could help other women escape similar situations and rebuild authentic lives from the wreckage of their marriages. 6 months after the gala, what had started as my personal catastrophe had evolved into something larger and more meaningful than I could have imagined. The conference room at the downtown Marriott was packed with 58 women from across the country, all wives or partners of men who'd used charitable organizations as fronts for financial crimes. When I received Catherine's email, said Helen Davidson from Boston, addressing the group, I thought I was the only person stupid enough to miss the signs that my husband was stealing from our environmental foundation. Learning that this was a systematic pattern, that we were all specifically targeted for our social connections and trustworthiness, changed everything. I watched these women executives, community leaders, philanthropists, as they shared stories eerily similar to my own, the gradual erosion of decision-making authority, the subtle psychological manipulation designed to undermine confidence, the carefully constructed isolation that made questioning their husband's activities seem like betrayal rather than due diligence. Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic accountant from Boston, presented her findings to the group. The pattern is remarkably consistent across all cases. These men specifically sought out women with inherited wealth, family foundations, or established social credibility. They used romance and marriage as tools to gain access to charitable organizations that could serve as money laundering fronts. The statistics were staggering. Our informal network had identified 47 similar cases across 18 states, representing over $30 million in stolen charitable funds. But more importantly, we documented the systematic nature of the targeting and manipulation that made these crimes possible. The legal system treats each case individually, I explained to the group, but we've proven this was a coordinated strategy. These men shared information, tactics, and even specific targets through informal networks in the consulting and financial services industries. Margaret Santos from Chicago raised her hand. What can we do beyond pursuing individual criminal cases? How do we prevent this from happening to other women? This was the crucial question that had driven me to organize the conference. Individual justice wasn't enough. We needed systematic change to protect charitable organizations and the women who ran them. We're proposing legislative reforms at both state and federal levels, I announced. Revealing the comprehensive policy platform we've been developing, enhanced oversight requirements for charitable organizations, mandatory financial literacy training for board members, and most importantly, legal protections for whistleblowers who expose financial irregularities in nonprofit organizations. The policy proposals had emerged from months of collaboration with victim advocacy groups, nonprofit oversight organizations, and progressive legislators who understood that charitable fraud undermined public trust in philanthropic giving. But perhaps most importantly, we were creating a support network that could help women in similar situations recognize warning signs, document suspicious activities, and safely extract themselves from abusive relationships before the criminal behavior escalated. I want to read something, said Jennifer Walsh from Philadelphia, standing with a letter in her hands. This is from a woman in Chicago whose husband has been pressuring her to modify oversight procedures at their family foundation. She's been feeling crazy, like she's being paranoid and controlling, but after reading our materials online, she's realized she's seeing the early stages of what we all experienced. The letter described behavior patterns. We all recognized the gradual redirection of financial decisions through the husband, the introduction of new consultants with questionable credentials, the pressure to reduce board oversight in the name of operational efficiency. She's documenting everything now, Jennifer continued, and she's prepared to expose the operation before it fully develops. Because of our work, another foundation will be protected, and another woman won't have to experience the betrayal we've all survived. As I looked around the room at these remarkable women who'd transformed their victimization into advocacy, I realized that Robert's systematic targeting had inadvertently created something he never anticipated: a network of informed, motivated, and strategically positioned women capable of exposing and preventing charitable fraud on a national scale. 9 months after the gala, I stood in the reception area of my new office building in downtown Manhattan, reading the brass nameplate that still felt surreal: Guardians of Charity, Nonprofit Fraud Prevention, and Victim Advocacy. What had started as my personal nightmare had become a thriving consulting firm specializing in protecting charitable organizations from the exact type of systematic abuse Robert had perfected. "Catherine, your 2 p.m. appointment is here," my assistant announced. I'd hired Lisa Chen not to be confused with anyone Robert might have known specifically, because she had a background in forensic accounting and absolutely no connections to New York's traditional nonprofit community. My appointment was Victoria Martinez, the daughter of a prominent Boston family whose environmental foundation had been infiltrated by someone using Robert's playbook. Unlike me, Victoria had caught the warning signs early, but she needed help documenting the evidence and safely extracting her organization from the criminal operation. "I can't believe how similar the pattern is," Victoria said, reviewing the checklist we developed for identifying charitable fraud operations: the gradual takeover of financial decisions, the pressure to reduce board oversight, the introduction of new consultants with impressive credentials but questionable backgrounds. Over the past 6 months, Guardians of Charity had consulted with 37 charitable organizations across the Northeast, helping them identify vulnerabilities, strengthen oversight procedures, and, in several cases, expose ongoing fraud before it caused devastating damage. "The most important thing," I explained to Victoria, "is that you're not alone, and you're not crazy. These operations are specifically designed to make intelligent, capable women question their own judgment. That's how they prevent detection." But perhaps most rewarding was the call I'd received the previous week from the Department of Justice. Our work documenting the systematic nature of charitable fraud had contributed to federal legislation requiring enhanced oversight and whistleblower protections for nonprofit organizations. The Harrington-Davidson Act, named for me, and Helen Davidson from Boston, will be signed into law next month. "There's something else I want to discuss," I told Victoria. "We're launching a training program for women who want to help other victims of charitable fraud. It's part legal advocacy, part crisis counseling, part forensic accounting. We call it the Authentic Leadership Program." The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. Robert had spent 25 years talking about authentic leadership while systematically betraying every principle the phrase represented. Now I was building something that actually embodied those values. My phone buzzed with a text from my new romantic interest: James Sullivan, a former federal prosecutor I'd met through the Victim Advocacy Network. Unlike my relationship with Robert, this one was built on genuine mutual respect, shared values, and complete financial transparency. James had insisted on signing a relationship agreement that explicitly protected my business assets and decision-making autonomy. "I want to show you something," I told Victoria, pulling out a photo from my desk drawer. It was from last month's first annual Charitable Fraud Prevention Conference, showing 58 women who'd survived similar betrayals, now working together to protect other organizations and empower other women. "A year ago, I thought discovering my husband's affair was the worst thing that could happen to me," I said. "I had no idea it was actually the beginning of the most meaningful work I'd ever do." Victoria smiled, the first genuine expression of hope I'd seen from her since she'd arrived. "So there really is life after this kind of betrayal." "Not just life," I replied. "Purpose, authenticity, and the kind of success that can't be stolen because it's built on your own abilities rather than someone else's manipulation." Through the window of my office, I could see the Manhattan skyline and Central Park beyond the same view I'd had from the Harrington Foundation office. But everything looked different now, clearer, more honest, finally mine. 18 months after the gala, I was reviewing client files in my office when Lisa announced that Robert was on the phone. He'd been released on bail pending appeal, his conviction for federal racketeering and money laundering charges under review by a higher court. I hadn't spoken to him since his sentencing 6 months earlier. "Catherine, we need to talk." His voice sounded different, smaller, less commanding than the man who'd once dominated every conversation. "I'm at the Starbucks across from your office. Please, just give me 10 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed curiosity, perhaps, or maybe the need for closure that comes from facing your past with the confidence of who you've become. Robert looked older, thinner, his once perfect appearance diminished by 18 months of legal battles and public disgrace. He'd lost the commanding presence that had made him New York's golden boy of financial advisory. Now he just looked like what he'd always been underneath a mediocre man who'd built his success on manipulation and theft. "You look well," he said as I sat across from him. "Successful. I've been reading about your consulting firm in the business journals. What do you want, Robert?" "I want to explain, to apologize, to help you understand that everything I did was motivated by love, by wanting to build something worthy of you and your family's reputation." I studied his face, looking for any trace of the charm that had once convinced me he was my perfect partner. "You embezzled $12 million from charitable organizations to fund money laundering operations. Which part of that was motivated by love?" "The pressure, Catherine. You don't understand the pressure of living up to the Harrington name, of trying to be worthy of your family's legacy. I made mistakes, but I was trying to build something that would make you proud." The psychological manipulation was still there, refined by 18 months of practice with defense attorneys and prison counselors. The attempt to make me responsible for his choices, to frame his crimes as misguided devotion rather than calculated exploitation. "Robert, I've spent the past year and a half helping other women recognize exactly this type of manipulation. You targeted me specifically because my family's reputation would provide cover for your criminal activities. You never loved me. You loved what I could do for your operation." His expression shifted, the mask of remorse slipping to reveal something harder underneath. "Fine. You want honesty? You were perfect for what I needed: naive, trusting, socially connected, and just insecure enough to let me manage the details while you played the gracious hostess. If you'd been smarter, none of this would have worked." There it was, the truth he'd hidden behind 25 years of performed affection and partnership rhetoric. "Thank you," I said, standing to leave. He looked confused. "For what?" "For confirming that everything I've built since discovering your fraud is real, my business, my relationships, my sense of purpose. All of it is authentic because it's not built on lies or manipulation or stolen money, unlike everything we had together." Robert's face flushed with anger. "You destroyed my life over a mistake, one moment of weakness, and you turned it into a federal case." "That one moment?" I laughed, genuinely amused by his revision of history. "Robert, you ran a criminal enterprise for 12 years. You systematically stole from veteran support funds. You defrauded multiple charitable organizations. You manipulated and psychologically abused multiple women." I leaned closer, my voice dropping to the same whisper I'd used in the ballroom 18 months earlier. "But most importantly, you underestimated me. You thought I was too weak, too dependent, too invested in appearances to fight back. That was your biggest mistake." As I walked back to my office, I realized that this conversation had given me something I hadn't known. I needed absolute confirmation that the woman I'd become was incomparably stronger than the woman I'd been. 2 years after Meredith accidentally sent me those Amalfi vacation photos, I stood in the same grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel where Robert's empire had spectacularly collapsed. But tonight, the space was filled with a different kind of energy entirely. This was the second annual Charitable Fraud Prevention Conference, and the transformation was remarkable. 400 attendees, nonprofit executives, board members, federal investigators, and survivors of charitable fraud filled tables where New York's elite had once witnessed the most spectacular marriage implosion in the city's social history. The irony of hosting this event in the same space where my old life had ended felt like poetry. 2 years ago, in this very room, I thought I was exposing one man's betrayal, I said, addressing the audience from the same podium where Robert had delivered his speech about authentic leadership. I had no idea I was uncovering a nationwide criminal network that threatened the integrity of charitable giving across America. The audience included faces I now knew well: Helen Davidson from Boston, whose environmental foundation had recovered completely and now served as a model for fraud prevention; Victoria Martinez, who'd become the East Coast coordinator for our victim advocacy network; Margaret Santos from Chicago, whose foundation had not only survived her husband's attempted fraud but had grown stronger through implementing our oversight protocols. But perhaps most meaningful were the newer faces, women who'd contacted us before their husbands' criminal operations had fully developed. Women who'd recognized the warning signs and taken action to protect their organizations before devastating damage occurred. The Harrington-Davidson Act has now been implemented in 43 states, I continued, providing legal protections for whistleblowers and requiring enhanced oversight for charitable organizations. We've documented the prevention of over $45 million in attempted fraud, protecting hundreds of legitimate charitable programs from criminal exploitation. James Sullivan sat at the front table, smiling with the pride of someone who understood exactly how far I'd traveled from the woman who'd been performing the role of Robert's perfect wife. Our relationship had evolved into something I'd never experienced before: a genuine partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and complete emotional honesty. We moved in together 6 months ago, after extensive conversations about financial boundaries, career priorities, and personal autonomy. James had insisted on signing a comprehensive relationship agreement that protected both our individual assets and decision-making independence. Unlike my marriage to Robert, this relationship enhanced my personal strength rather than diminishing it. But perhaps most importantly, I said, concluding my speech, we've proven that systematic betrayal can become the foundation for systematic empowerment. Every woman who recognizes manipulation tactics becomes capable of helping others. Every organization that strengthens oversight procedures becomes a model for institutional integrity. As applause filled the ballroom, I looked out at an audience of people committed to protecting charitable organizations and empowering victims of financial fraud. The same space where Robert had been exposed as a criminal now hosted an annual conference dedicated to preventing the crimes he perfected. After the event, I walked through New York streets with James past the Harrington Foundation office that now housed a small legal aid clinic, past the coffee shop where Robert had made his pathetic attempt at reconciliation, past all the locations that had once defined my world as Mrs. Robert Harrington. Any regrets? James asked as we reached Central Park, the city skyline stretching out before us under a canopy of stars. I thought about Meredith's accidental photo message the moment that had shattered my perfect facade and revealed the criminal enterprise underneath, only that it took me 25 years to discover who I really was. Meredith had made a mistake. All right, but it had been the best mistake of my life. The woman who'd spent 25 years performing the role of the perfect wife had died in that ballroom 2 years ago. The woman who'd emerged from the wreckage was finally, authentically, uncompromisingly mine.